Okay, so yes, the men and women are communicating differently. We can see that the woman is using these longer utterances with inclusive pronouns, we, us. She's using modal verbs to present what she's asking people to do as a choice. You ought to, you can. Okay, whereas the man is using these kind of more imperative choice, imperative explicit commands, seemingly much more shorter, much kind of like stripped back language. But what's the context that these examples could be from that could also give us another layer of understanding? So with words like dose, lie down, take your shoes and socks off, sit for me right there, where might you hear language like this? Yes. So guys, we are in the doctor's surgery. Okay, and that doctor's surgery means that irrespective of whether they're communicating differently, what can we say about these men and women? Intelligent, professional, um, been through the education system, been through university, resilient. They are both demonstrating other characteristics that are similar, that are noteworthy, that are worth kind of drawing attention to. And the question becomes, so what if they speak differently? Does it make a difference? Do we trust the man more than the woman? What's our impression? Now that's why I want to start with this, because actually what we see is that often it's how language makes us feel that creates our reaction to it, and therefore its speakers. So if we hear something and we think it's unpleasant, we then attribute that feeling back onto the speaker. We kind of like rebound it off us. So the attitude rebounds off us back onto them. So if I don't like that accent, I'm not going to like you. If I think you sound wishy-washy or weak, I'm going to use that to judge you, but it doesn't actually really mean that you are those things. It's how I'm reacting as the listener to how you're making me feel, or how the speech or what I hear makes me feel. And the truth is, guys, we shouldn't be ruled by our feelings. We are much more logical, rational creatures than that. Anyway, what we could also say then, so based on context, which doctor would you rather be with? I mean, because actually we could argue that they're both using language differently, and I might feel less intimidated, more included by the way the female doctor's talking to me. I might feel less patronized. I've got a choice. This is up to me. I mean, she's working with me. I'm not alone. Lie down, take your shoes and socks off, sit for me right there. Yes, it's really clear what the doctor wants me to do, but do I feel cared for? Do I feel like he's interested? Maybe not. Okay, so these examples lead us into our second theorist that we're going to be looking at today. Okay, and each of these illustrate in grown-ups something that through her research she began to see operating in children. So who are we looking at today, guys? We are looking at this lovely lady. Okay, so this is Marjorie Goodwin, a professor of anthropology in the University of California. Okay, now Marjorie Goodwin, here she is, has been working from the 1980s through to contemporary times 2012. So actually she's got longevity on her side. Yeah, longevity means she's lasted the distance. She's been working in academic circles, probably predating the 80s, but it was in the 80s that she published her first findings that we're going to look at today. So she's got a really well-established history, okay, of over 32 years of proven academic credentials. In other words, she didn't get fired. She didn't make a mistake. She didn't do something that might get her thrown out. So Marjorie Goodwin, professor of anthropology, University of California, working in the 1980s through to contemporary day, 2012. And what does she contribute? Well, she does contribute to our understanding of difference. Okay, so she is one of our difference theorists. So under the deficit concept, sadly, we only really have Lakoff that operates there. So even though we have one named theorist representing for deficit, Lakoff, we have several that we begin to introduce around the concept of difference. Now, once you've seen all the difference theorists, it's not that you need to know them all. There will be some that you think, right, those are the three I'm going to learn. Those are the ones that I really understand. Those are the three theorists that kind of really resonate with me. Now, I always like Marjorie Goodwin. I'll tell you why. Because actually, when we get into it, her contribution to the argument of difference is really clearly illustrated in language. Now, we've talked before over here where it says illustrated examples, that actually the best grade, so the students that are achieving the highest in their exams, not only know when a theorist was working, can kind of give me an overview of their theory, but can illustrate their theory. So for me, any theorist that makes it really easy for me to learn some illustrated examples, I automatically gravitate towards, because I want to be securing the information I need for the highest grades. And we will see that. We've already seen that each of those doctors' utterances that we've just analysed and that we've just looked at are actually illustrated examples of this little thing over here. So what did Marjorie Goodwin contribute to this conversation around men and women in difference? What did she say is at play? So on one level, we can zoom right in on her contribution. And what she contributed was evidence that men and women use what we call directives, and that depending on gender, there was a gender bias towards using what we call either mitigated or aggravated directives. Now, we are going to expand and unpack each of these in more detail, but this is just kind of, if we're creating a little flashcard, this is some of the key information. How did she arrive at these outcomes? Okay, well, she used what we call field work and observation. So she went out into the field and she used fieldwork observation to arrive at these conclusions. Now, if I tell you that the doctors that we've just looked at, okay, so the female doctor who was using pronouns such as we, us, inclusive verb forms, let's stay on that dose, the modal choices, we ought to, that female is illustrating what we call the use of mitigated directives. So the balance that Marjorie Goodwin suggests exists is that females are more likely to use mitigated directives, whereas men are more likely to use aggravated directives. So aggravated directives such as lie down, take your shoes and socks off. So it's those very seemingly explicit commands. Now, so we could put in the illustrated column, okay, you could just make a note of that in a minute. Men, aggravated directives, lie down, take your shoes and socks off. Women, mitigated directives, let's keep you on that dose. Let us see how we can help you. So anything that illustrates from the previous screen. Now the challenge is, okay, yep, this was originally kind of brought to light in the 1980s. So is it still relevant within our contemporary time scale, our landscape? But also what you'll see is that Goodwin did say, okay, so this is happening. However, there are some cases where it doesn't, where men and women go against what's expected. Okay, so there is some challenge there. But we could also say it's a challenge to the idea of deficit. So it challenges lack of. So sometimes when we talk about how one theory challenges, it doesn't have to be that you're evaluating the theory within itself. You can compare it and evaluate it against others. So Goodwin would say that women use mitigated directives because they use language differently to communicate their needs to men, not because they're weak and hesitant and they have a shortcoming in their language. She wouldn't interpret the female behavior as being a shortcoming or a failing, which is what Lakoff did. Okay, so we could say that the difference model of Marjorie Goodwin challenges the ideas of Lakoff. Both do acknowledge that women are using language differently, but Goodwin's interpretation of that difference is more neutralized, that women are just using language to get what they want in a different way, whereas Lakoff would interpret that difference as being a sign of a shortcoming or a failing. So we're just going to have a little bit a little bit more in-depth look. So this picture's here to help you, remind you of how she worked. So initially then, particularly in the 1980s, Marjorie Goodwin worked with, what does that picture suggest? Children. Brilliant. She looked at children in a school setting, but in the school setting where there was an absence of teachers. So she was looking at how children interacted in their playtime, in their alone time. Now on the next slide, I'm just going to read through to you her method. Now this is not for you to copy down. You don't need to know every sentence, but we're just going to think about what it tells us about how she came to these conclusions. So now this is from her own site within the university webpage. So it was originally written in the first person, okay? So a principal concern has been how in the midst of interaction with their peers, children elaborate and dispute their notions about ethnicity, social class and gender appropriate behaviour as they play or work together and sanction those who violate group norms. Now, guys, as we go through this, you're going to make your own notes from this information based on some of the things I'm about to tell you. You're not going to copy this down. Now, what I love about this is it's part of the challenge, but also the strength, if you like. So the first thing is she's looking at interaction by children with their peers. So children playing and interacting with other children. So immediate challenge could be, well, how does this translate to adults? How do her findings translate to adults? And the truth is, we've seen the doctors using some of the outcomes, some of the conclusions that she makes with children. Okay, but these are two key words. Children elaborate and children dispute notions about ethnicity, social class, and gender appropriate behavior. So, in other words, children have been brought up based on their ethnicity, their social class, and their gender to have certain expectations. So, little girls are brought up to believe they wear pink. Little boys are brought up to believe they wear blue. Little girls are brought up to believe that they play a particular way. Little boys run around, scream, and shout. So when it says that they elaborate those notions, it means that they conform to those notions. They play those notions out. But Goodwin also recognised that in certain areas they dispute those notions. So again, there's the little girl doing everything she's expected to do as a little girl, who then suddenly does something that disputes those stereotypes, those expectations. Okay? And as they play or work together and sanction those who violate group norms. So this is a really interesting study because as though it's about gender, it can help us go back to social variety and this idea of the importance of the social group, the subgroup. Yeah. And actually within any group, there are norms that are established. If you follow those norms of the group, you get the in, you stay in. If you break those norms or do something that goes against those norms, you're sanctioned. That could be that you're excluded from the group. So imagine children at play. It's that moment where Jenny's meant to be in charge, but suddenly somebody says, oh no, I want to be in charge. And because that's violating the structure, it's going against what people expect, they all turn and say, well, we're not playing with you anymore. And they might sanction, in other words, exclude the person from the group. Okay, so this field work, which was situated in a Los Angeles elementary school with children of mixed ethnicities and social classes, has involved following a group of children over 3 years as they moved from 4th to 6th grade. So this strengthens Marjorie Goodwin's method, her process. So she invested 3 years in observing the behavior of the same group of children. So this is a really strong study. We've got mixed ethnicities, we've got mixed social classes. So we know that this isn't going to just be about gender, that potentially we can use some of these findings in other ways. Okay. She recorded 80 hours of taped interaction. Okay. But it was recorded while children were eating lunch, playing at recess, interacting in the classroom. Playing. So if we talked in the past about observer's paradox, we've recognized that there are some forms of methodology and observation where people are so conscious that they're being recorded that they adapt their behavior. Over the years, Marjorie Goodwin really kind of absorbed that. Yeah, she watched them at play, so they were less aware they were being recorded. She did it over time so she could look across the sample and see what maybe had been affected in the early days by observer's paradox and that which was more natural. Okay, so during play and outside of their teacher's awareness, children decide who's to be included or excluded within their play group. Okay, so again, social organization, social kind of groupings really clearly demonstrated in the school playground. They decide who's in and who's out. Through their language choices, children propose forms of inclusiveness or alternatively differentiation amongst players. So sounds quite complex, but one of the first conclusions then Marjorie Goodwin saw, as well as the mitigated and aggravated directives, was that children use language, their language choices. So children are in control of language. They are using it to either include others or differentiate others. So either to include or exclude, to include and draw in or to push away. So how are they doing that? Through forms of ridicule, such as ritual insults, storytelling and directives, children socializing one another regarding in and out group memberships and notions of social class. Okay, so what we want to write down here is, so what is the language that's creating either inclusion or exclusion? Now, for us, the reason I've highlighted directives is that although there are other things that she cites here, for us, it's all about the directives, isn't it? So we've got insults, storytelling, directives, and they use language to either say you're in or you're out. Okay? And most psychological studies of children's friendship and relationship aggression are based on interview data. So in other words, a lot of the prior research into children was done through interviews rather than this kind of observation. So this again strengthens Marjorie Goodwin. So what I want you to do now is just to reread this and to extract and to summarize it into your own overview of her method. See you tomorrow, guys. Bye.